Characters are the people that occupy your world. Everyone from the protagonist, right the way down to the person who cleans his shoes, is one of your characters and needs to be fleshed out enough to take their place in the story. Some of your background characters don't matter, they can be little more than something that looks like it fits. But as we move further to the foreground, it becomes increasingly important that they look, seem and behave just right.
I ate his liver with some fava beans.
Our central character is our protagonist. The protagonist is the main character and is often thought of as the hero, which they absolutely do not have to be. As we grow and mature, especially as writers, the more we come to appreciate that life isn't that clear-cut, and neither should our stories or characters be. As an author, we should be thinking in terms of the protagonist being at the center of the action and driving the narrative rather than as a moral heart of the story.
I do bad things.
They should be just as flawed as any real person. They should have opinions that don't always ring true. They should have quirks, strengths, weaknesses and imperfections. It doesn't matter if they're quintessentially good or morally bereft, they are simply the heart of the story. Our job as a writer is simply to make them relatable, to put enough humanity into them to make them feel real. People relate to real people, so a character that has some kind of connection to us will make us interested in what happens. They don't have to be any kind of hero to achieve this. The next most important character is the antagonist. Just like the main character, this doesn't have to be a villain. They don't even have to be evil, just that their interests and motivations must conflict with and cause problems for the protagonist, to give them something to rile against. This character might be secondary but is at least equally important. The reader is meant to form a bond with the first, perhaps even picturing them with their own face and putting themselves into their world. But the antagonist is the challenge, that's the person they need to overcome. In a romance story, the antagonist might literally be the love interest. In a crime drama, they might be a murderer. Whatever it is, they are the opposite, the thing driving the journey our main character is taking. Getting them right makes the journey real, it sets the odds and forces the reader to feel sympathy for their plight. Get that right, and the audience will want to follow along with you. After the two main characters, there are a host of others that might find a place in your work. There are many conventions used to help create these characters, and here are some of the most popular. Not every character will conform to this structure, and nor should they. Some characters will be a blend of several of them, and that's perfectly fine too. Myself, I'm a blend of slightly broken artificial intelligence, horrible engineering, spite, hatred and self-loathing. If I hadn't been artificial, I probably would have considered being an author.
Touché.
Foil. A foil character plays off of your protagonist. Often they'll have a role to play in the action, but their main reason for being there is to provoke the actions of our lead. The job is to show off the abilities of our protagonist. This is often the domain of the sidekick. This is Dr. Watson to Sherlock Holmes, Robin to Batman and Spock to Captain Kirk. In each instance, they are weaker than the main character and need to be rescued, educated and pointed in the right direction. The Watson. Dr. Watson took such a leading role in the works of Arthur Conan Doyle that he ended up with a literary character archetype named after him. Watson was relatable to the audience. He was wide-eyed with wonder, an ordinary man out of his depths against the genius of the great detective. What this gave the author was a chance to show the thought processes of an unrelatable character to the audience. In whatever guise they take, the Watson is very much like a foil, only their function is to stand in for the audience and have things explained to them. Whenever something is complex and difficult to understand, we have the Watson standing by to ask those questions on our behalf and have the answers explained to them. It's a bit of a cheat, if overused, but it's often the most natural way to present things to our audience. Of course, it's always better to show them than to tell them. Anti-hero. Sometimes we don't need our protagonist to be a hero, we need just the opposite. An anti-hero does the right thing, standing in for a hero, but has questionable motives. They're often someone who would be viewed as a villain if looked at from a different perspective, but in this role they end up doing essentially the thing that seems correct. It could also be a character who isn't morally acceptable, who we know is villainous or immoral by nature, but who still takes center stage or still appeals to us in some way. Examples of this from comic books are Judge Dredd and Venom. Judge Dredd would be a controlling fascist in most stories and a symbol of oppression, while Venom bites the heads of people, and that's probably fine.
Nobody cares what you do.
Dynamic. A character who is dynamic is subject to change. Your main characters should be dynamic. They must end up changed by their experiences in the story. The most obvious example of this is Ebenezer Scrooge, the lead character in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. He begins as a miserly old man, a hateful, spiteful character, but the miracle of Christmas wakes him up to himself and he becomes a different, more sympathetic person by the end, learning and changing from the experiences he's lived through. To a degree, most of your characters should be dynamic.
You're wrong.
We understand instinctively that life is change and we're used to seeing our perceptions challenged. The opposite of this is the flat character. This character doesn't change or evolve. These characters belong in the background, as they're important enough to move the plot along, but not enough to be fully fleshed out, realized people. This is typical of characters like M and Miss Moneypenny in the James Bond novels and movies. We know that M is in charge, he's a strong, controlling influence, and we know Moneypenny is feminine and attractive with just a hint of some unseen depths. But we never learn more about them, nor do we need to. They move the plot along and that's all they need to do. In that particular example, it might even hurt our plot to find out more about their lives. If M went home each night and beat his wife after working his way through a box of cheap Belgian lager, the character would lose our respect. Similarly, if we found out much more about Moneypenny, any mystique would be lost.
Oops.
Bond reserves her as special in his life. She's the only person off limits, and that's an understanding between them. It helps us to understand more of how isolated and alone he really is.
We are alone.
Flat characters exist in abundance on television, even in the role of main characters. In episodic material, especially sitcoms, nothing and nobody changes and nobody evolves in any way.
Yes, change. By all means, change.
This was because episodes were written and screened in no particular order, so change could potentially upset the balance of the run. This was often sarcastically alluded to in more recent comedies. Seinfeld famously made it their policy that none of the characters would grow or evolve in any way during the show and that nothing of importance would ever change. The Simpsons did this very well, with the lead character explaining how he hadn't learned a thing.
Marge, my friend, I haven't learned a thing.
Flat characters certainly have their place, but they're to be used sparingly. If your entire story is littered with meaningless people we don't care about, we won't care about the story either.
Nobody cares.
Stock characters are literally off-the-shelf clothing in literary form. We recognize a sock as a sock, and the same is true of these. These are waiters, scientists, police officers, and teachers. These are characters we all know and recognize, and simply telling us what they are tells us all we need to know. These are people in uniform, or a type so well understood that we know exactly what to expect from them. This is purely reserved for characters of no importance, and we describe them sparingly for exactly that reason. The audience doesn't want or need to know anything more about them, so we use an easily recognized cliché to avoid distracting from the main action. On top of all this nonsense, there are common archetypes. These are commonly used character traits that many, if not all, of our characters might lean towards, or borrow elements from. These are meant to be used as a place to start, so it's important that we develop our characters beyond the surface. The more we put into them, the more the audience will get out. Caregiver. This is a parental figure. This person looks after the other characters and supports them on their journey. It's rarely used for a protagonist, and is instead relegated to supporting roles, such as a doctor or teacher. This is more likely where our protagonist might go for advice. Creator. This person will build, make, or be driven to change something. This person finds motivation in making something that will leave a mark on your world. We can find this character teaching or educating others, a scientist searching for a cure, or a mechanic building a custom vehicle. Think beyond the ideas of just building a thing. They could be founding a concept, or bringing together a group. Explorer. This is anyone looking for answers or freedom away from the crowd. This is anyone who rejects what is normal or true, and goes looking for something different or better. It doesn't matter if this character never leaves their own home, so long as they are unsatisfied where they are. Hero. This is an honorable, brave and steadfast person. This is to be used sparingly as they are death to drama. There is a reason that Batman always beats Superman, and that's simply because the audience wants him to. A flawed, rounded and interesting character, who is more than just a flat set of rules, is always more compelling. Heroes make excellent stock characters, but beyond that they're usually not interesting enough to keep the audience invested in their journey. Innocent. Children are often this. This is someone who doesn't understand the world they find themselves in. They are guided by a set of morals or principles rather than experience. This is for fish out of water stories, but it can be for any character where we can use their naivety to help draw the audience into a new world and instill a sense of awe and wonder about it. Jester. A joker or a clown, often used for comic relief, someone to give the audience something to break the tension. Rarely will the jester be our protagonist. More often they'll be in a supporting role as a bumbling buffoon who makes mistakes and seems ridiculous. If there is a character named Colin, there is a very high probability that they fill this role.
That's a stupid name.
Lover. This is, fairly obviously, a lover. This person loves, or is passionate about something or someone. Often the love interest, the besotted character who follows a more important character around, trying to get noticed. This person's primary motivation and the defining characteristic is their attachment to something else.
Dying for our cause.
I love this car.
Actually, I don't care about anything.
Magician. This doesn't have to be a literal magician. It's a person with the ability to see what could be and the power to make it happen. They have some gift, in that respect, or they hold some special secret. Of course, with the rise of fantasy literature, it could also literally be a magician. With writing, anything is possible.
That was magic.
Orphan. This is a helpless, lost child. Someone who has nobody that cares about them and no need to adhere to the rules. It doesn't have to be a child. It could be someone lost, with no way home, or someone who has been abandoned. It's someone who is looking for something and has nothing to lose. Rebel. Someone who goes against authority and holds nothing more sacred than personal freedom. They don't think the same way as everyone else and they don't follow the crowd. They stand outside of the masses and are often better for it. This character needs to have good reasons why they have rejected whatever facet of normality that you've pitched them against. If you're using them as a lead character, then there has to be a solid explanation as to why they don't fit into the world you've put them in. An example of this going wrong is Divergent, where the main character rejects everything for no good reason, leaving the audience baffled as to what her motivation actually was.
Who knows? Who cares?
Ruler. This could be anyone in a position of authority. It could be a teacher ruling over a classroom, or a politician telling other people what to do, while doing the complete opposite themselves, perhaps. It could be a parent, a head of a household, or any other person who holds sway over others and controls the situation. It would normally be a strong or powerful character, and their motivation would usually be to retain their position, or to improve it. Sage. This is the wise knower of the truth. The sage could be a guide to our protagonist, or to the audience. It could be someone who reveals a plot twist, if you were really very lazy indeed. Most often, it would mentor the main characters and serve as a beacon of light for them to follow. Everyman. This is you, this is me, this is all of us. An everyman character is relatable. They are just like us and take on the role of the audience when they're led into a world that might be difficult to understand. They have no odd or unusual quirks and that make them easier for us to project ourselves into. They're an old coat we can easily slip on that is comfortable to wear. An example of this would be James Bond. In the original concept, Bond was just an ordinary man in an abnormal world. The story was about the terrible things that happened from a perspective the audience could relate to easily. Although he changed massively later, he began from a modest beginning.
Yeah, I can relate!
Of course, there's really no way to make a character that everyone can relate to, so it's important to consider the needs of your target audience so you can better make them fit. For example, if you were creating a protagonist for a story like Star Wars, then identifying your primary audience as being young men and boys would lead you to create a character like Luke Skywalker to be placed at the center of it. You wouldn't fill it with a bunch of old monks with absolutely no charisma whatsoever, or a walking aquatic monkey demon with a speech impediment, as nobody would have any interest in that. Similarly, you wouldn't have the lead character as a hollow, empty female character or perhaps a raving psychotic woman with purple hair. Or would you?
Activating shrug mode.
Of course, these are just some of the main types, and there are plenty more. Everyone out there has a different idea of what they are and what they mean. These are not meant to be rules, a cage for you to be trapped in. It's more of a scaffold, a place from where you can grow. I was told that lover, for instance, cannot be used as a protagonist, but I think that millions of successful romance novels prove that's not true. The truth is, there are no hard and fast rules. You certainly need to be aware of these ideas, but it's your choice how far you use them, and which ones you choose to reject. The best characters are none of these things, at least not any single one of them. Your characters can blend any of these types that you chose, and the more you bring to them, the more unique and diverse they will be. Different is interesting. If we all just copied and pasted what everyone else was doing, we'd be inundated with stories about sparkling teenage bloodsuckers, teen dramas about young people inexplicably fighting authority in some dystopian future, and tales of plain, unattractive people ending up with the hottest person they know.
Yeah, that sounds about right.